God. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this professional development series. This is a series that we are doing for the first time from POD this year. And this came from, and I will shortly tell you about some of the topics that we are dealing with in this series. But this was coming directly from all of you. So if you remember when I was coming in last year, I did a needs assessment survey with all of you to understand what's going on and what you would need. So based on that needs assessment, we have several topics that came out as very strongly for us to cater to the needs. And that's how we got started with the professional development series. As you can see, there are 4 sessions we are doing, and this is not all. We would be offering quite a bit in the future, but for this session, we have 4 sessions. One is grant writing, which is today, and all of these are virtual. And we were also talking about publications or conference preparedness. Quite a bit of program leaders were unanimously saying that we need to offer for everybody, basically how to write abstracts, how to prepare for conferences, how to publish. It's not about the process of publishing, but what you would need even to think about publishing at a later stage. So we would be dealing that on March 23rd. Then we are also doing curriculum development in general for everybody. Again, all these professional development sessions are open to all in extension. It's not staff or faculty or different types of faculty and all that. It's open to everybody. Anybody can join and learn about these things. So we will deal quite a bit on curriculum development in different aspects, how to design, what kind of formats are there, how to access different types of resources, and everything we will be covering in April. And in June, in general, we will talk about the evaluation and assessment, how to incorporate all these components in your program. And those who are doing really well, we would also like to bring them on board to share their resources or how they went about doing it. So it's more like a learning from others, and as well as providing you some basic tools that you can use at a later stage in all your programs. So this is the whole series, and before each series, I reach out to everybody or send out the bulk email. I have been doing that quite a bit. But to register, to share the resources, and after also I would record and share everything. And eventually all of these are going to our POD website, which is under construction now. Okay, so coming to our today's business, we have an amazing panel and panelists on grant writing and extension. So they are going to share what they have been doing and how they went about doing that. What are the tools, techniques, and some insider story. So we are going to hear from all of them today. And for housekeeping, what are we doing in this panel in today's session? I would be introducing in the beginning all the panel members and their expertise, where are they from, means which program area they are from. And all of them would present for about 15 minutes or so on their research area, their program, the broader general program that they are coming from. And I will also share some of the points that we wanted to cover for everybody. After that, we will do this question and answer session. I do have some hard questions to ask, and then we will open that for everyone. But we will see and go with the flow. it's pretty informal at this point. So we want all the panelists to touch on some of these aspects, like what is the area of expertise, what agencies or types of agencies that they secured grant from, and how to form a team, what preparation is needed. It's when you get a grant, it's a big deal, but nobody sees what you went through. So that preparedness we would be talking about, and if any opportunities, which is quite a bit, opportunities coming up that people can apply for grants to. So these are some of the points that I would be sharing and presenting. And now I will go ahead and introduce our panel members, and then we will listen from them. Okay, so let's welcome all our panel members. We have Mr. Thomas Hudson from 4-H, Mr. Jonathan Case from ENI, and then we have Dr. Sean Henley from FCS, and Shannon Dill from Agriculture and Food Systems. So let me introduce them one by one. So first goes Mr. Thomas Hudson. Tom is a University of Maryland Extension faculty member and 4-H youth development educator. His primary area of interest are scientific literacy, agricultural education, and workforce preparedness. His work related to the 4-H Club program includes life skills development in the area of communication, leadership, and civic engagement. Prior to UME, he worked as a high school science teacher, a wildlife conservation project aide, and a disabilities counselor. Tom has been a PI or co-PI on grants from organizations at the local, state, and national level. Funding agencies including the Maryland 4-H Foundation, Maryland Grain Producers, Midshore Women and Girls Fund, Talbot Family Network, Talbot County Health Department, and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, NIFA, from USDA. So welcome, Tom. Thanks for being here. And our next panelist is Mr. Jonathan Case. He's a retired forestry extension specialist. Jonathan retired as an extension forester with the University of Maryland Extension in April 2022 after 32 years of experience in teaching, research, and extension. And we brought him back from his retirement, and we successfully did that. He is presently working part-time on a special project. He maintains an office located at the Western Maryland Research and Education Center near Hagerstown. During his career, he developed and implemented extension programs in woodland stewardship, woodland steward training, which is Maryland Woodland Stewards, invasive species management, wildlife damage management, natural resource income opportunities, handheld GPS, disturbed land restoration using biosolids and hybrid popular trees, and wood biomass energy production. That's quite a bit. He is one of the primary authors of the Woods in Your Backyard Guide, first published in 2006 and revised in 2016, as well as the more recent Woodland Health Practices Handbook. He initiated and provided leadership for the Woods in Your Backyard Partnerships, a multi-state effort to promote creation and enhancement of small acreage properties. Jonathan has authored numerous extension publications and newsletters. Welcome, Jonathan. Thanks for being here. Yep. Now we have Dr. Shauna Henley. So Dr. Henley has been with the UME for 9 years and serving the Northern Cluster as the interim Extension County Director, Senior FCS Agent, and an affiliate to the Department of Nutrition and Food Science here in campus. Her area of expertise is around nutrition and food safety across the food supply chain. Welcome, Shauna. Thanks for being here. Okay, and next is Shannon. So Shannon Deal is the Agriculture and Food Systems Extension Educator for University of Maryland Extension in Talbot County. She has been a faculty member of the University of Maryland College of Agriculture and Natural Resources since 2001. Shannon graduated from the University of Wyoming, receiving a Bachelor's of Science in Agricultural Business and a Master of Science in Agricultural Economics. She provides outreach and education to agriculture producers of Talbot and neighboring counties in farm business planning, small farm enterprises, marketing, and livestock management. Applied research projects include production economics, farm profitability, and risk management, which are very, very important in today's place. Statewide, she provides leadership to the Mid-Atlantic Women in Agriculture Network and the Maryland Beginning Farmer Success Project. Welcome, Shannon. Thanks for being here. So we have these amazing people here today with us, and they are going to present and let us know about what they have been up to and how to write a successful grant. So I would first request Thomas to share his slides and go ahead with the presentation.
Okay. Okay, everyone should be able to see this now, I hope. First thing, I know we have time for questions later, but if I'm going through these slides and a question pops into your head that you think you'll forget, feel free to unmute and just ask me the question. If somebody puts something in chat, one of the others will have to let me know because I probably won't be able to see the chat as we're going through these.
Yeah, Tom, we're on point to do that. Thanks.
Okay. It's interesting that we're going in this order because we're starting with 4-H youth development, and our grants and our grant procurement is probably the most different from all the others in extension and very different from the research fields. So people always say those 4-H people are weird. The stuff that you're gonna see now is gonna look maybe very unusual if you're not familiar with 4-H. And then as we progress through, probably some of the grants the others talk about are going to be more what you're used to seeing. So I thought I'd start with just common reasons why 4-H youth development educators try to procure grants. One of them is, I think the most important thing a lot of my coworkers would say is that we do youth education and it's hands-on experiential learning. So that experiential learning requires a lot of supplies, and a lot of times it's perishable items. So the most common purpose, I think, shared amongst us for getting supplies is purchasing materials that we need to use for hands-on activities. And then, of course, there are several counties such as ours where our travel funds are fairly low. So sometimes my colleagues and I try to get grant money to help support mileage reimbursement for traveling around to and from various sites. Our 4-H clubs sometimes have projects they would like to do, and so we work to support the clubs in trying to get grants. I just applied for a Talbot Arts Council grant this morning, actually, for one of our clubs because they want to purchase musical instruments to be able to do some things with the children in their club. Another thing, it's a dream in 4-H world, and some of the other program areas it may not be as big of a deal, but in 4-H world, to try to get money to hire someone is much more of a challenge sometimes, because that usually only comes with very large grants, and a lot of grants we deal with are more on the small scale. And then, of course, the very last thing we can't leave off the list is that as the faculty members, we're required to have scholarship, and grants are part of that scholarship. So one of the things that's important in 4-H world, and probably in other program areas, is saving yourself trouble and trying to find grants that match your programs. When I started an extension, people would say, oh, here's a grant you can do, here's a grant you can do, here's a grant you can do. You know, it was something you can put on your CV. And I found quickly that applying for grants that don't align with what your interests are and what the needs in your area are and what your programs are, it's very difficult to make things artificially fit And it's much better to really think about your programs and then try to go after grants based on what your programs are. So you can see here that just the big picture, think about the mission and the community needs of the organization. And then it really comes down to program design in an interesting way that I think it seems to help to design your major programs around the mission and community needs. And then once you have all of that set up, especially if you're a new educator, then think about grants that support those programs. So for example, in 4-H youth development, we have 3 national 4-H program areas, and science and agriculture is one of the major emphases here. And I've used color coding throughout my slides. So you'll see here that anytime you see blue, that's relating to science and agriculture. And then we also had the healthy living national program area. And so that I've color coded in gold. And then civic engagement, that is in green. And so you will see those. So the one main thing is working on programs and procuring grants. It's important if they support these national program areas. And then, because I like to match things up and align things, and it seems to help, Maryland 4-H.
So
Yeah.
sorry. Do you have do you want to show all the next upcoming slide to people, or just wanted to show the bigger one? Because in the slide we see both coming.
Oh, is
together.
it showing both?
Yeah.
Let me see why it's doing that, because it looks, let's see.
If you hit display settings.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to see.
On the top, yeah.
On the top where it says display settings.
Yeah, I'm just seeing it's looking kind of weird on my taskbar here. Let me see if I can get this taskbar out of the way and try again. Let's try for the second time, duplicate. I've picked duplicate twice. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, my computer didn't want to unmute, and it didn't want to duplicate my display today, I guess, for some reason. So anyway, for our priority, thank you for pointing that out. For our priority areas, we have 6 of them in 4-H, and what other people may assign them different ways, but what I think of as the arts and sciences and the college and workforce readiness, they most closely align to me in my head with the science program area, that national initiative. And then healthy lifestyles and self-acceptance and social empowerment and resilience, they tend to align with the healthy living. And then we also have priority areas of community and civic engagement and leadership skills for life, which I think of more along the club program and the civic engagement aspects that are there. But again, trying to align everything. So people are probably thinking, what does this have to do with grants? Well, these things kind of help you focus on what you're looking for grants. And Deb asked us to talk about our expertise or our background. You've already mentioned some of that, Deb, in the introduction. But I also color-coded my background work experience, because you can see that when I was a disabilities counselor, that related to the 4-H healthy living area. And then the other work that I did in blue, that is the vast majority of my interest and of my work experience prior to coming to Extension. So that all connects to science. So big surprise, most of my grants that I work on are going to come from the science area. And while you'll find that most of our 4-H coworkers, whatever their strengths are, tend to be what they work on to match those community needs. And then in 4-H youth development, I've coded that in green for civic engagement, but that really covers all of the areas that are with us. So as I've said, it helps to seek grants that support your major program areas. So I aligned my program areas in my CV with what the national 4-H program areas are. So I have scientific literacy education, and then the black areas underneath of that are just sub areas that I focus on. Healthy living education, and then the clubs and outreach. So it's kind of nice when the program areas match up with the national and then the state goals, because then it's easier to get grants. So thinking about grants, there are different levels. In 4-H, we have a big difference in scale. A lot of our grants are very small amounts of money, or some of them are not even officially grants. So in the CV template, it talks about gifts. So one of the things is solicited funds. There are some times in 4-H where we get things that are not even funds, but they are important to support youth programs. So those things will be training and supplies. So we've gotten trees, tree seedlings from American Tree Trust in the past, seeds for various wildlife projects to be able to get just seeds. Progressive Agriculture Foundation, it's been several years, but we've done school safety days where they do training and supplies, but they do not give you grants. But that's still something that's important in 4-H world, is bringing in things that may not be official grants. Also in 4-H, there are donations and fundraisers are important to support primarily the 4-H club program. So a lot of counties have auctions at different times of year where they sell off various things, and then that money is used to support the 4-H program. Maryland Agricultural Fair Board provides money for awards and recognition type things to the different counties if we submit reports each year. Tractor Supply has a paper clover promotion, so when people visit the stores, they can donate money, and then those funds can come back to 4-H. So it's important, if you have something like that, to work with the Tractor Supply in your area in 4-H. Civic organizations sometimes donate money to 4-H youth development. And then the Maryland 4-H Foundation, we actually were able to raise money several years ago through donations, and there is an endowment that gives us interest income. So I'm not sure about the other program areas, but in 4-H, a lot of our funds come in through things that are not officially grants. As far as gifts go and solicited funds, sometimes money is given from businesses with a mission of philanthropy. So our Exploration team, which is a statewide program, a signature program now, we solicited funds from Patel Corporation, and they gave us money to help fund our programs. And we also, for some of these statewide programs, got money from internal UME and AGNR funds and groups. And the names of these committees have changed over time. We used to have the Agriculture Profitability Impact Team and Community Resources and Economic Development. So for some of our programs, we got internal funding from them. Now we have the strategic initiative teams, and I know some of them have put out grant application requests and things like that. So then in 4-H world, the next level up is getting into small competitive grants. And these are usually things that are less than $1,000 and not run through Aura. Our Maryland 4-H Foundation tends to have, not continuously, but at various times, educator grants or club grants that could be available. So here you can see that the Healthy Living, the gold, we have gotten in Talbot County mini grants to support nutrition and safety education, environmental education. We got money to help a green school do environmental projects and get recertified. And that's what that little picture to the right is showing. We were doing some environmental work with students. Robotics, supplies and equipment. And then for clubs, we've helped clubs get funds for arts and healthy living and also for STEM education. Again, these are just a few $100 programs, things like that. Sometimes 4-H gets funding through foundations. Some of the counties, I believe, like Howard or Carroll maybe, have their own county 4-H foundations, and funding can be procured from them. There are also community foundations. Here in Talbot County, we have the Midshore Community Foundation, and in the past, we've received money from them for doing safety education. Then there are civic groups that offer competitive grants at times. And so, for example, the Talbot Optimist Club, they provided us funding for healthy living. So just to think about what are the organizations in your area where you could possibly get some of these small grants from, it would be good. Then, of course, you move into the large competitive grants, and these are sometimes much more difficult for 4-H youth development because a lot of youth grants don't allow indirect costs, or they set, only 3% can go toward indirect costs. So then we either have to ask Aura to waive the indirect cost portion of the grants, or sometimes grants can be run through Maryland 4-H Foundation or other county foundations where the fees charged are much less. So some of those examples are educational nonprofit organizations. We have gotten funding in our local area from the Midshore Women and Girls Fund to do science career education. And the one I mentioned about the Talbot County Arts Council, that's something I just submitted this morning for one of our clubs for music education. There also are agricultural commodity groups. We've several years gotten money from Maryland Grain Producers Utilization Board. So if you work in an area of agriculture and you look for a commodity group that supports agriculture, that's a natural connection. There are also national grants from National 4-H Council. Probably the best example of that is that a team of other educators and I worked on something called the Ag Innovators Experience. And so for 2021, we put in a proposal with National 4-H Council, and then we were selected to get 2 grants, one for development of a climate change education curriculum and one for implementation of that curriculum. With regard to other large competitive grants, sometimes county and state agencies have funding that could be available. So for us, we get funding from Talbot County Health Department. We have youth do tobacco prevention education. So that's a picture of one of our youth members there who during COVID, when we couldn't have the children go out to the tobacco vendors and do the educational part, we had members who recorded scripts and made videos of themselves. And then we took them around, the adults did, to show all of the vendors and talk about how they're not allowed to sell products to people who are under 21 years old. Things like that. So that's, think about your local and county and state agencies. County government grants are available sometimes. We had several years where we got money through our local management board, and it was actually governor's money, but we were able to implement a nutrition and gardening education program. And this is one of the rare times when we were able to have funds in the grant to hire someone to go around and do the education for us, which was a big help because it multiplies the effort of the 4-H educator and program assistant. And then as far as federal and state grants go, the large grants like that tend to be most common in 4-H, where we work together on a team and it's a project that would be implemented statewide. So then we would jointly apply for and manage the grants. And of course, somebody would take on the role of being the PI, but we would share those things. So we've done that like with our Agsploration and our career experience programs. Deb asked us to talk about forming a team for grants. Yes.
Tom, thank you. You mentioned to hop in if we needed. Do you mind going back just a couple of slides? I wanted to hone in on a point that you made about some of the larger grants and not going through Aura. And so there's a couple of things I wanted to just touch on with that, because as you mentioned it. With that said, just to be clear, there's a protocol that we have in our organization that we all have to follow related to Aura. And AgPause is available to be able to answer some of the questions about where does this need to go. So as Tom said, some of the grants don't actually end up going through, or they don't allow indirect and some other things, but there's other foundations that can receive them. So anyway, what I'm underscoring is that the best course of action for any of those is to approach your program leader or your area extension director and then have that initial conversation with the director of AgPause as an example, and they'll quickly tell us, no, this isn't one that we'd be able to receive. And then that clears us to work with the foundation, which also has protocols that we would follow. And I appreciate Tom's point. As an example, the National 4-H Council, all of those grants, there's issues with intellectual property concerns that we've never been able to reach agreement with the organization, with the broader university. Therefore, in meetings with the AgPause and the director of fiscal office, then there was approval to be able to manage those through the Maryland 4-H Foundation as an example. But I wouldn't have independently decided that. There's always opportunity to reach out, and that's just something I wanted to underscore. So I appreciate Tom drawing attention to that. Thanks,
I'm glad
Tom.
you mentioned it that way, Jeff, because, for example, National 4-H Council, the way that it was presented to us was that they have to give the funding to a nonprofit organization. And that's where Maryland 4-H Foundation was able to step in and assist like that. But yeah, all these things we have to run through the normal processes and make sure that we're doing everything correctly. So thank you for emphasizing that. Back to forming a team. In 4-H world, some of the reasons why we form a team, and I think it would probably relate to other program areas, having common goals with coworkers or other educators who are in other program areas, but working towards something that's a similar goal. Or you're already offering a similar program to something offered by someone else. And in doing this, then you are able to combine efforts. You may already have a collaborative program that brings together one program area or people from outside of 4-H and with other program areas, and then it makes sense to collaborate. Sometimes the scale is too large for one person to implement. If it's a statewide program, you may need other people. And in 4-H world, a lot of times we need multiple adults there to supervise whatever is going on. So that is a case where you need more than one person. The grant may be more than one county or Baltimore City or one person needs. And so if you work together and then bring in money and then it can be given out as sub-awards, that would help. And an example is sometimes federal grants will have money that will come into the state level, but then you can have county sub-awards that go as in underneath of those. And in 4-H, team formation usually arises naturally through collaborative work. So Deb's question originally was, how do you form a team? And I think the takeaway for 4-H is that it kind of just happens naturally in our work. And I think it may in some of the other program areas as well. So then just a few tips for successful proposals. As I mentioned at the beginning, try not to go for random grants just to bring in money, because then you have a headache figuring out how do you fit that in with your work. Carefully read the entire request for applications. I've heard of people doing all of the work and getting to the end and submitting a grant, and it turns out they missed one or two things, and that knocks them out of the running or for consideration for that grant. Another idea is to check the application deadline and begin writing early. And Jeff had mentioned our process for grants. Well, the grants office needs to know far in advance of the deadline when the deadline actually is and when things need to be submitted. So it's good to talk with the grants office. And again, start early. A lot of people are busy and they procrastinate, and that tends to be a disaster in getting grants, it seems, for a lot of people. Another thing that's good we found is that in writing the grants, to try to use research, including statistics and data, and a description of various things, how your grant is accomplishing the goals, how your program will support what's going on. A strong situation statement and strong objectives seem to get grants. I don't have proof for that, but it seems to be that moves them ahead in consideration to the next level. And then another thing I think we found is to assume the reader has no knowledge of your program. I've been on committees where I've reviewed grant applications, and sometimes people assume that the reader has intimate or intricate knowledge, either one, of the program, and really, as the reader, you don't know what they're talking about. So that's a good tip, I think. Whoops, let's see. Another thing is a lot of people throw around a lot of abbreviations or acronyms, and I think for clarity, sometimes it's good to just go ahead and spell them out the first time, or if they're not super long, spell them out every time, unless you have a character or a word limit, and that way it adds clarity. It's good to try to be specific in the program narrative and talk about, again, how will your program accomplish the objectives, because then the funding source can see what it is that you're doing, that what positive things will you do with the funds that come to you. Also, for the budget, to try to clearly justify the items. If it's possible, reviewers seem to like to see exact items that you're going to purchase, but otherwise you can give examples, and nobody knows a lot of times at the beginning of a program what exactly it is they're going to purchase. So if you can give examples but leave some flexibility, that way you're not violating the spirit of the grant by going outside of the budget descriptions later on. Another thing that's good is to proofread or have somebody with editing skills do it, because the more professional the grant application looks, the more likely I think it probably is to be funded. And then just a tip that I have found over the years is it's best, even if you have online grant applications with the little boxes that you paste into, it seems to work best to copy all those headings, put them in Word, fill out the sections in Word, and then copy and paste them back into the boxes, because a lot of times it's hard to see the full text or scope of what you're doing when you're typing into a little box, especially a box that doesn't expand. And also that way you have a record of it saved in Microsoft Word.
So Tom, a question popped in. You had said to ask him while you were going. So what Jenna sends forward, what makes a situation statement strong? Two slides prior, you'd mentioned about a strong situation statement. So if you could speak to that quickly.
Well, one of the things, situation statement, again, we are supposed to, in extension anyway, we're supposed to be doing programs that meet community needs. So for a situation statement, to talk about what the needs are that are in your area, whether it's your county or your geographic area, or it could be a larger geographic or the whole state or the whole country even. But then to come in with some statistics and relevant data that help to document and demonstrate that need. And then when you start talking about the objectives of your program, it seems to make more sense. You've justified why you need the program. And if you don't justify why you need the program, I think funding agencies would have a harder time, being motivated to fund the application you've put in. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not. If not, just chime in.
It did. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. So in 4-H world, David asked about upcoming opportunities. We just always are on the lookout for things that might come up. So one of the things is to think about, there are all those annual 4-H fundraisers, the Tractor Supply, if Maryland 4-H Foundation has anything, the $4 for 4-H, things like that. We always try to be on the lookout for those types of fundraisers that could bring in money to support programs. We get bi-weekly 4-H updates from Dr. Nia Fields, and a lot of times we just need to pay attention if there are any grant opportunities or special funding opportunities mentioned in those. We get grant information from National 4-H Council, emails, and so sometimes there will be something in there that will click and look like it will mesh with your program. It's also good at the local level to participate on boards of community organizations or government agencies that provide grant funding. I was on a board for Talbot Family Network, and that's how we ended up getting the funding for the nutrition and gardening education program, as an example. And then to try to participate in statewide or national program committees, because the programs for state level programs or even national programs are always talking about getting funding to expand the reach of the programs. And finally, the one that a lot of people may be tempted to do first, but it doesn't always have to be first, I would say, would be searching online grants databases and just seeing what you can come up with that looks like it might be a good match for your programs. And that is pretty much it for my slides.
Thank you so much, Tom. And would you like to just, yeah, I wanted to do something. Okay.
And now it doesn't want to let me stop sharing. Okay, here we go.
Okay, awesome. So that was a brilliant presentation. I really liked the way you went through every detail, and that not only gives the 4-H people, but everyone else that opportunity to learn about what's going on in case somebody wants to collaborate, and people are always eager and willing to collaborate with 4-H. So we also need to know the other side of the story. So thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and the information. So now our next panelist is Jonathan. So it's over to you now.
Okay. Let me see if I can share this. Wait a minute, I'm sorry, I shared the wrong screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Yes.
See that?
Yes.
So, yeah, so I'm, like I said, just retired April, but, I was asked to kind of give a little overview too, in terms of, I work primarily in the area of, forestry and wildlife management, but it's a broad area, the natural resource, environment and natural resource area that Bill Hubbard's program leader. So he asked me to kind of give a little bit overview of what those, areas are, which includes extension as well as Sea Grant, which is actually a separate organization funded by NOAA, but is incorporated with the UME program as well. So just to get, this is kind of an idea that with University of Maryland Extension, with our environment and natural resource programs and Sea Grant, that's about 40 faculty and staff, with a diverse variety of fields, a lot of different stakeholders, which I'll show you in the next couple of slides. And I will, so you can look here and see, did I lose my, no longer.
Perfect. We can see the whole slide now. No, go back to the earlier one. Perfect. Yeah.
Funky stuff. Anyway, So in terms of Sea Grant focuses primarily on, water and aquaculture related to oceanic, of course, from NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And you can see the different program areas under water, climate and energy, a lot of watershed work, climate resilience, the Watershed Academy, which many extension people might know, heard of, and a lot of things with septic and water quality, as well as the whole aquaculture field and the whole seafood, working with the seafood industry. And those are kind of the focus areas of the Sea Grant program. In terms of natural resources, primarily two kind of separate areas. The area I've worked in for years is forestry and wildlife and natural resources. And you can see some of the program areas. These are different programs within there, woodland storage, which is your backyard, and other things that we have ongoing, that have been ongoing, as well as some working with 4-H as well, in some capacities. And then there's a whole area of home horticulture and master gardening, and that's incorporated as well into the natural resource program. So it's kind of these four large program areas, of which the first two are kind of Sea Grant, and the second two are kind of the environmental natural resource area. So with that said, a couple highlights. These are some of the programs of the water and climate, the watershed storage program, and Baltimore Urban Waters Partnership, some energy work as well under that. Then the whole aquaculture field, it's quite large, a lot to do with salmon and sustainable aquaculture systems. And these are some highlights from some relatively new things in forestry and wildlife and natural resources. We hired recently a wildlife extension specialist, Luke McCauley at the Y. And so we have a more focus on wildlife management. Actually, a lot of work I used to do is now handled by him, or used to do. And the whole Master Naturalist program as well, which has been a growing effort. And then on the environmental landscaping and horticulture, you see this has a lot to do with the Home and Garden Information Center, Baywise. These are a lot of ongoing programs, master gardeners. So these are the areas overseen by Dave Hubbard, the program leader. So for me specifically, I was kind of asked to talk about the whole grants aspect of what I had done. And my goal and my focus was primarily on people and communities to make informed natural resource decisions, of which this included woodland owners, people that own woodlands, farmers, homeowners, many times smaller woodlots, master gardeners, master naturalists. Worked with a lot of county, state, and federal agencies, partnering in a variety of different ways, which have led to many grant opportunities. So much of this is actually, being on some committees and boards, I think as Tom mentioned as well. And then working with a lot of natural resource professionals who are professional foresters, they're businesses that work with natural resources. And then a lot of nonprofits. And from a grants perspective, I've had a good opportunity in a number of years actually working with nonprofits in terms of securing some funding grants, because it fit in with their objectives. And I would just say one of the advantages of working with nonprofits is that in terms of the accounting and all that aspects, reporting, it's just a lot easier. You can go with, you get into USDA grants and stuff, the rigorous reporting can be kind of demanding and tiring. So, and also I would just say, in working with some nonprofits as well, and other organizations like that, in many cases, they have different policies on indirect funds, so that you may have to have paid indirect incomes to the college, university. And of course, local government officials and youth. So these are some of the main target audiences. So over 34 years, I basically worked to develop programs. There wasn't a real program when I came here in 1988. But these are kind of some of the activities. And many of these things all these things have really required grant funding to make them happen. All right. So much thing you may not know is that 75% of the woodlands in the state of Maryland are owned by private individuals. Mostly family forest owners, not the government. So the thing you always say is that the future of Maryland forest depends on the decisions of 150,000 private landowners. So we put a lot of work over the years in traditional forest stewardship seminars. And what happened in the early 2000s with a lot of lands being fragmented, you started getting a lot of more small acreages that these larger acreages that developed and divided up into smaller parcels, which spurred the need for programs to educate people on these small acreage ownerships. And that furthered a whole new demand of actually switching from grants that I had pursued before to different organizations to fund this kind of work. So that kind of comes with knowing your clientele, and as you go through the years, you see changes and things that happen, and you have to adapt and sometimes look for new organizations to work with and new audiences. A lot of work I've done since I first came was developing a volunteer management program called Maryland Woodland Steward. I was the one state extension forester. At the time, we had another Bob Jaden as well, but the best use of my time was to identify some very interested private landowners and spend 3.5 days with them, developing them as volunteers to go out and spread the word of forestry and forest management. And again, that was funny. They kind of just fell in my lap because someone contacted me, and that was from a nonprofit called the Rough Grouse Society. Who had ever heard? I'd never heard of the Rough Grouse Society, but through various connections, I became aware of the Rough Grouse Society, and they have given me $10,000 a year for 15 years to run a program. Then the whole wood energy, again, this is another area where as you go along, you see new opportunities. Started pulling together a group of people interested in this whole area of wood energy, developing a group, of partners. And this led to, developing the Wood Energy Coalition. And from that has come some large grants, and actually to the point where an organization that I started with Extension has now been passed off because the group has solicited some Forest Service funds, and the end result of that is that it's become a much larger effort. So this whole idea of once you start programs, once you get grant funding, perhaps start programs, at some point you may pass those things on to somebody else. You don't have to do it all the time. So that's just something to think about. These things aren't all static. You don't have to continue things forever. A lot of work with deer management, especially natural resource income opportunities was a big area. And that was another grant where just through happen chance to the USDA Rural Development Administration, I became aware that they were at the end of a funding cycle. They really didn't have anywhere to put this money. And on very short notice, put together a grant proposal, for like $150,000. And but sometimes, if you keep your eyes open and look for opportunities, they'll come along. We also worked creating this regional local government exchanges, and that partnered with the Hughes Center and a number of local government organizations to provide them education. GPS came by in the early 2000s. Well, nobody knew about GPS. So within the profession of forestry, we developed some materials and training classes, and probably educated about every professional forester and wildlife person, a lot of other arborists and others on how to use GPS application. And then finally, the last area of hybrid poplar. This is a very big area that came kind of again through working with some other groups, and elicited funding actually from not government organizations, but WSSC, which is a large utility. So hundreds and hundreds, $500,000 or more in funding, because it fit in. They were looking for a partner to do research because of issues they had with biosolids and finding an environmental-based system to work with this, and working with a private company. So Extension filled that role. And that's one thing I've continually found is that most people don't know what Extension does. And once they do, they find us as very viable, valuable partners. Because first of all, we can handle money. Most state agencies, organizations can't handle money. If you ever try and give money to a state agency or something, it's a bookkeeping nightmare. So we're set up to do education. And that is one of the real strengths we bring to the table when we work with other potential granting partners. We can do education. We can do outreach. So to pass on just what were some of the grant sources that I have utilized over the years. I just kind of grouped them in these main areas. The private nonprofit. And I mentioned the Rough Grouse Society again. It's a wildlife conservation organization, and they funded our Maryland Woodland Stewardship volunteer training program for 10 or 15 years. $10,000 a year, very little reporting necessary, phone calls, just keeping in contact with the director and so on and so forth. And those are great grants to get. Believe it. Very easy in terms of how the money can be, a lot of flexibility how the money can be used. One of my criticisms of large federal grants is that you're very locked into spending money in certain areas. It's very difficult to transfer monies from one area to another. When you get grants from nonprofits, that's necessarily the case. Maryland Tree Farm and the Maryland Forest Association or other nonprofits we've worked with over the years. And federal, I mentioned the U.S. Rural Development Grant that we got back in the 90s for doing natural resource income opportunities programs. And part of that was hiring an enterprise consultant to do a lot of the work that needed to be done. And I think it's really important as you develop grants, who's going to do the work? So, and don't be afraid to ask to put that in there. I mean, it has to be a competitive grant, obviously, but you have to have funding to do that, and not just for the person that's going to do the work. In many cases, we get grants that are, smaller in nature, but you always should include some money in there. At least I always have for faculty assistants, where I can perhaps hire a faculty assistant, put together enough funding to help support somebody who can do all the little things that need to be done, website development. Administrative assistants are great, but they only have certain capacities or capabilities they can do since they work for a large number of people. And if you want a lot of programming things done and other things, it can be very difficult. So it's nice to have somebody actually working for you. Other groups, the USDA Forest Service, state and private forestry, they work through the State Forestry Agency. So we work very closely with the Maryland DNR Forest Service. And we've secured a lot of funding for grants. These are many times targeted grants, but we also have a memorandum of understanding with them where we get money from them every year to support a position at the Y, because they see the value in what we do. Fish and Wildlife, that was a grant years ago for when I first started this Woods in Your Backyard curriculum. They had an idea that this backyard curriculum was a good thing, and they had some money and they were willing to give it to me. So again, that was a chance occurrence at a professional meeting of the Association of Natural Resource Extension Professionals, similar to the 4-H Foundation, the 4-H Professional Association, or the ag agents. Somebody happened to run into, and it led to a discussion, and led into like $40,000-$50,000 to help develop the whole curriculum. So those are some of the things. State forestry agencies, like I mentioned, the DNR Forest Service we work very closely with, and the Wildlife Division as well, to a lesser extent. But being the only forest extension person, a lot of my work really takes me to work with other states. And many of these are partnered efforts amongst Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. And so we've received funding from some other departments of forestry. In terms of regional organizations, I mentioned the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission. Now, for those of you that are working in the water quality area, you might want to look at some of these large utilities, because some of them have funding for special projects that they want to pursue. So I would just say that. The Northeast Center for Rural Development, I'm not even sure they're still around, to be honest with you. They're out of Penn State. But that was another organization. But Northeast SARE, or SARE grants, are a lot of people in agriculture and natural resources use these grants. They can get grants for training. They're relatively, not easy to get, but they're out there and very available. And you can actually get products out there, publications and impacts, and scholarship. As being a professional forester, I work my own professional association. was a professional forester, and they've had their own grant programs for things that we support. Finally, just our own internal organizations, the McIntyre Stennis grants, our federal grants given for money, given for forestry. Many times they go to, they're kind of distributed, they have been in the various research departments. And we have managed to get some of those funds. We've also secured some grants from the Hughes Center for Agroecology, which again, in the area of forestry and land use and things like that, they're a great partner. And the experiment station also has some grants. And at one time we had a UME impact fund program. They're not handing out money anymore, so I think we have to look elsewhere. But finally, how to form a team. This was mentioned kind of by Tom, so I don't want to be over repetitive, but engage with faculty of organizations that you have shared interests, the need for your program. And maybe not just them as well, but keep your eyes open and work with other organizations and see if there might be opportunities that come up for the future. I always say that negotiated grants are unique. This is where you may negotiate a grant because they see a need, they see you as a viable partner with a nonprofit, or not even a nonprofit. It could be some other state agency or whatever. Each of these can be very unique and kind of tailored grants. They're not necessarily competitive grants in some cases. Gauge the interest of potential partners and what they want to do, pursue. And, many times we work with organizations and then grant opportunities come up. I think one of the mistakes I know that I made earlier in my career was being with an organization and kind of asking for money, because you knew they had money. Well, it just doesn't work that way. You really need to engage and let them know what we as Extension can provide. And I think that usually comes out to be a very much positive. Be organized when it comes to meetings and stuff. I'll just say this because I think that's very, very annoying, especially with Zoom and everything else. If you're going to have a meeting, have an agenda. And if you're going to have these meetings, make sure you do time and security commitments. Don't overpromise, be dependable. If you make mistakes, don't be afraid to apologize. Finally, prepare the proposal. This was mentioned by Tom. Make sure you have your information, survey information, stuff to back up the need. What are the roles and expectations for funding and the responsibilities? For me, when I do a grant, one of the first steps I do is a budget. Once I get past that, this is something I want to do. What is the budget going to look like? Because that's really going to drive a lot of things. That's just kind of the way I've done it. If possible, I always like face-to-face meetings initially if possible, if that's possible.
Jonathan, sorry, would you like to finish that in 1 minute or so? Sorry about that, but time is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No worries.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is there's other grant opportunities, but I'll do that for next time. And this is our website where a lot of materials are. That's the way to deliver a lot of content today. And just say that don't chase money. Many of your partners may not be in UME, and understand the needs of field versus campus faculty, and build in faculty support for you, and make sure these grants are going to produce scholarship and program impacts that could advance you professionally. And my idea has always been when I develop new programs, I'm kind of doing this every 3 to 5 years because that's what keeps me motivated and interested. Sorry, went on so long.
No worries. Thank you so much, Jonathan. 34 years, that definitely looks like that. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us. Let's all give him a big round of applause. And then we will move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Shauna Henley.
Great, thanks for having me. I don't have anything to visually present, so I'll be just talking. So like Jonathan said, knowing and understanding what the different expectations are between on-campus faculty and us out in the field. I know when I was looking for jobs, I didn't want to be in a position where maybe half my salary was coming from grants. I didn't want that pressure kind of thing. And I also thought grants were super scary to go after because most of the ones that I've seen through my education were federal grants. But as Thomas presented, there's a lot of smaller local grants that are just as equally as important as some of the federal grants. So I would say, don't be scared, try to jump in some way. and learn from every single experience. So when I started here, I wasn't ready to write a big USDA grant as the PI or PD, just because one, I didn't have any programming yet, so I didn't have pilot data to show a strong need for why I needed more money for a proposed project. I also was still learning a lot of the names and faces and expertise throughout extension and even on campus as well. So I would say for me and how I started getting more involved with grants was being a key personnel. So I wasn't writing and managing the entire grant, but my role was what I was hired to do at Extension, teach. So they had me coming on smaller grants for an obesity youth grant. And my role was to help teach and train others in the county so they can implement these programs to help overall achieve reduced childhood obesity. And that was a happy spot for me under this USDA grant. It was managed by the Maryland School of Medicine, and I learned some great techniques, right? Jonathan talked about if you're leading a grant, being organized, having those meetings, having an agenda. So I got to experience how someone else was putting those aspects into a working model and seeing the scholarship successes that this individual had leading their team. Then as things progressed, for me, my background is in nutrition. So my master's was watching people cook a dinner time meal and seeing how their culinary skills were and how that related to some of their thoughts around health and wellness. My doctorate was in food microbiology with applied human nutrition. So for my intro photo, my 14-second claim to fame was telling not people to wash chicken. And, you know, one of the things that I'm good at is teaching food safety education, but only with consumers. And when we think about food safety, you might have growers, you have processors, you have people that want to start a food business, you have retailers. And so my curiosity was what happens with food safety further along the supply chain. So as Jonathan said, had that curiosity. Luckily, I think I had that early on, and I started to get involved with different groups. So Ag and Food Systems, for example. I got to learn about some of the food safety around growers, so the produce safety rule. I also got to learn more about manufacturing with preventive controls for human food. And so some of these new learning experiences for me have also led to grant opportunities. So for example, Neith, Shannon, Ginger, who's now retired, we went for a USDA Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Grant. Ginger built a great team. She had Shannon, who knows a lot about risk management, my background with food safety, and Neith is the jack of all trades. And plus with Ginger's background with marketing, we had a really strong team to go after this grant. We were awarded it, and then Ginger retired. So some of the things that I've learned over time is how does that team transform and kind of fill in those holes when someone else leaves. So Ginger happily retired. Shannon, Neith, and I decided like, all right, who doesn't have a lot going on right now to take on the PI role? So at the time that was me, and we reconfigured the budget. And one of the things that I realized now that I should have done early on, and I've talked to Shannon about it, was Neith and I took co-PD roles, gave ourselves like a 5% salary, and we should have put Shannon on to have 5% salary. So again, when you're building the team, making sure that they're going to be fairly compensated. Some of it is just when you read the grant proposal, looking like, all right, that doesn't seem bad. And then if you start thinking about it more, what are those time commitments to develop something that's recorded, edited, things of that nature? So I think when you are building out that budget and thinking about the team members, compensating them fairly based on the percent of time that that project is going to require of them is something that you want to do. It's good business for extension, and I think it's good people management as well. Some of the other things too that I wanted to share, besides determining if you're ready to take on that grant writing PD role or just hanging out as key personnel, is understanding what the grant requires. And both Thomas and Jonathan talked about that. So for USDA, NIFA, AFRI grants, they have so many different RFPs that come out. It's mind-boggling. So some of the ones that I've been involved that are more nutrition focused, they require a logic model, where the food safety outreach program grant that I'm currently a PD on did not require a logic model at all. So if you need a logic model, maybe you bring someone on the team that has those skills, or maybe with what the POD's doing, you take some of their workshops and learn how to write those pieces. Other things too, if you're working with humans as part of your grant and you want to do an evaluation, they want to make sure that you actually have an institutional review board document. So if you haven't taken IRB, that's one of the things that they may want to have in place, saying, hey, we'll give you money, but where's your IRB number? What's your protocol? We want to see that first. So that's something that you want to be able to do and show before you even write a grant. Have the IRB done with Citigroup training, know how to write an IRB, and just have that ready in case the awardee wants to see that from you. Other things too is just knowing AgPass is great for the pre-award, but then what happens during the post-award and that support, because that's always in flux between who you're talking to down at College Park. Who do you need to talk to if you are handing out gift cards? When you're budgeting, was gift cards the best thing for you to purchase, or should you have bought other types of incentives, knowing the need of that target audience, right? If I'm working with farmers around food safety, maybe I talk to some at the grower meeting and realize they don't want cash, they want hand washing stations. So maybe I buy a bunch as an incentive, right? Some of those pieces. Another thing too is with grants, and I'll share this with you, is again, reading the nitty gritty and don't be afraid to fail. So the food safety outreach grant project that I'm a PD on, we submitted it in 2020 and got rejected. And that was great. We honestly got rejected for a good reason. They found some loopholes that when we were writing it, we were like, oh, hopefully this slides by. But obviously with the expertise of the reviewers, that did not slide. And we rewrote the grant, addressed all the reviewer comments, and were finally awarded the grant in 2021. And even with the reviewer comments, it made our proposal and the actions that we wanted to address more doable than how we first wrote it. Another thing too is seeing what kind of support your program leader can provide, or maybe even your AED. So if you write a grant and you draft it, are one of those groups able to help fund a grant writer to review it, make sure things are tight as you would want them to be going in for a review. So right here for USDA NIFA, they'll have the RFP, and then they'll also have another document that is hyperlinked where they have other pieces that your grant proposal will need to have. So it's almost like those hidden Easter eggs that isn't upfront at the ready. So you have to kind of dig for things. You'll also see oftentimes for USDA grants is a table, and they'll talk about integrated grants, extension, research, and a different document that is, I would say, kind of hidden is going to be something about award information. So they'll tell you about the project type, but then a lot of times we see in writing the words research, education, and extension. So what does that really mean, right? So the further you read, you'll actually find that in terms of USDA NIFA awards, they have definitions of what the research should look like, what the extension piece and outreach piece should look like. They give you some examples. And for some grants, they want you to have it all. So they're going to be called integrated research, and you have to have the research, education, and extension piece. Other USDA grants might say that you can have one or two of them. So again, just kind of knowing what boxes you need to check when you hit submit. Even from my experiences writing a grant, trying to write a grant a month before the due date is not a great idea unless you're just revising it from a previous failure. Just because if you're trying to get letters of support from different community members, different groups, they're on vacation and they're out for a week and a half, things get a little bit dicey. And I would say for when you are submitting a grant, USDA NIFA wants to make sure you have the environment and the support system to be successful. They're giving you money to be successful. So having that community partner sign off, having maybe an AED sign off, and a few other folks really helps strengthen the package. So I would say having one letter of support probably isn't the best thing unless it really does suit your need. Other things that I would share besides learning the post-award piece is think about subawards. Thomas talked about that. For our FSOP grant, we have UMES as a subawardee, and we also have New Mexico State University as a subawardee. And with some of these larger grants, again, bringing in more people, having, let's say, an historically Black university who's playing a very important role in your grant submission, that can give you an extra $150,000. So that's enough to provide a couple of salary savings for a few faculty member and additional resources that they might need. So you're talking about maybe a grant that maybe could be $500,000, but you add on a historically Black university, and that lump sum could bloom to $650,000. So again, just reading it, thinking about what your objectives are and who can you bring to the table. And I would say we're really fortunate to have folks at UMES that we have regular conversations with. Another thing too is seeing who else you need. A lot of these USDA grants want an evaluation piece. So for evaluation, if you can't do it yourself, you're looking to do more high power evaluation math, is there someone on campus to reach out to, right? Because again, USDA as well as UME wants to see impact from a program and hopefully in the positive direction. So really critically think what you can bring to the table, what skill sets you have, and a lot of times in these larger grants, you'll need to address what your skill set is coming in. And the more you work on grants, just being a part of them, getting rejected, it just helps you play that grant game. I know for me personally, I've worked with some folks on 2 different Maze grants and still haven't figured that one out yet. Soon, but again, it's one of those things. I would also, the last piece of advice I would say is, I think Thomas mentioned it earlier. See who has been awarded in previous years and what style of projects that have been awarded that you're going for. So for my food safety grant, I looked to see what other people submitted for and were awarded for, because for ours, we probably shouldn't replicate what someone else is already being funded for. What's that angle that we're going to play? And if you want to build off of a project that someone else got funded on, reach out to their PD and say, hey, would you be willing to share a little data here so we can maybe play off of what you're doing and continuing the work that your group started. So again, don't let grants be scary. Be comfortable with rejection. That's a big part of it. But again, the rejections is definitely where you learn the most, even if they're really hard lessons. So thanks.
Wow, brilliant job. Thank you so much, Shauna. she basically took us all in her journey, and everybody could relate themselves with that situation. When you are coming in as a new faculty member, what do you need, how to form teams and collaborations and juggle with office work, and then all the EGPAS and any kind of piece that is possible in one's life, in a professional life. So I'm pretty sure people are impressed with this one. It's a lot of information. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Shauna. Thank you. And I would also give this virtual reaction now that we don't have anything else. Okay, so now we have our amazing next panelist, Shannon. So take it away, Shannon.
Sure. So I'll put my slide up here. And I will make sure I pop these into the chat pod before I finish, because I want to make sure everyone has a copy of these slides. I do have a number of links that may be of interest. And this is a slide set that I've shared with the ag team prior, as well as the FCS team. I do keep making tweaks, so there's a couple additions here, because as you can see the disclaimer at the bottom, policies and process change. You learn things. All of a sudden, something you did with the last funder, they're like, oh no, you don't do it this way this time, or here's a different form. You've never used this before, but we'll use it for this time. So I think that being patient and rolling with the punches is just really important. So the following is my experiences with grant writing. So here's some helpful resources that I have used. We've got UME Answers has some information, the UMD position types, if you're going to be hiring, there's some information in there about hiring. Aura is a very great resource, as well as our AgPass resource. So those are their websites. And then this Koali research, for anyone who's had past awards, this is somewhere that you can go and look at awards. You can look at credit split and some of that. So these are just some really good links as you're going through the grant writing process. So for the ag grants, some of the ones that are popular, USDA, NIFA, and AFRI grants. We've done some beginning farmer grants, workforce grants. There's a number, if you're collaborating with someone on campus, oftentimes it's a larger USDA, NIFA, or AFRI grant. We also work very closely with our commodity organizations. Annually, there's grain producers, soybean producers, and a grazing grant that would come out. SARE has a number of categories for grants as well, research and education. There's even farmer grower grants in there. So that's an annual call for proposals, as well as the Northeast Risk Management. I've had a number of those over the years to support our farm management training, as well as women in ag. Some smaller private grants would be maybe through the Maryland Ag Education Foundation, Maryland Ag Council, Rural Maryland Council, and then some of our conservation partners do a number of farm research. I think Jonathan mentioned the Center for Agroecology and those. So these are kind of the grant funders that we see with our Ag FS grants. So, when you really, be strategic about grant selection, it is time consuming. It's something that you want to really fit into your research and teaching program. You want it to be complementary. So I started seeking grants because I was doing a project. We were doing Annie's project, which was a farm management training for women. And we had it here locally. And all of a sudden we were like, this could be a really great statewide program. Well, how do you make it a statewide program? You get some funding to make it a statewide program. And so very much most of my grants have kind of happened organically over time. Beginning farmer grants, another one where it was like, we needed to build this program bigger, and we could do that through some large grant funding. So I think grant funding works truthfully in 3 ways. I have 2 ways on here. It's a project idea and you look for funding. So we loved Annie's project. We said, we're going to go out and find a grant to fund this. maybe you see an announcement that comes across, your program leader shares it, or you see something, wow, I didn't know USDA would fund something like this. This could fit with my program. And then the third way might be you get a last minute call or email from a collaborator in another state, in a different department on campus, and they say, hey, would you like to be part of this team? Could you bring this to your area or your county or your region? So they really work in a lot of different ways. As mentioned before, kind of finding that synergy, something that you want to see a program develop and go beyond. And funding comes in lots of different forms. So there's lots of different types of funding out there. And as mentioned, I think Shauna, annual announcements are very similar. So if I'm thinking about if I have an idea and I'm thinking about a SARE grant, I can go to this year's RFP and read through it. They might change the priorities some, they might change some things, but for the most part, it's the same cycle, and it's a similar announcement every year. So take advantage of that. So you're not pushed for time and you're putting in a half decent proposal. And this photo should look familiar. It's a snapshot of her CV. So this is sort of where you're going to be putting in funding into that CV. And so I wanted to make sure I had that clip there. So you're going to have different kinds of grant roles, and I encourage people to have multiple ones. So, maybe you're the lead, you're the principal educator or investigator, you're the PI, you're leading this entire project. Perhaps you're a co-principal investigator, so you're a partner in that, or you have a piece of it, and it's through extension. You could also be a subaward, and the way that happens is some other institution is the lead, and you're getting money as that subaward, and you can be a PI or co-PI on a subaward. So say it's a partnership with University of Delaware, they reach out to me. So I would be the PI on their subaward. So they're the primary awardee, and then funding is going to go to them and then funnel down to us. And you can be a subaward either internal or external. So University of Delaware is another institution, but another example would be, say, the Department of Entomology. I do some work with them. They are the kind of the lead department on it, and then extension comes in as that secondary. So that's more like a child account as far as the mechanics. The other way might be just a collaborator. I am on a number of those. Oftentimes nonprofits, we don't have the luxury of submitting a grant at midnight on the day it's due. That doesn't happen for us. If you're a nonprofit of 3 people, you can submit a grant at midnight while you're still making changes. And so I've been in some of those situations where I really wanted to be part of a project, but the timeline just would not work for us. And so I've written a letter of support, or there's some things where they've funded, an example is some classroom time. They pay for the classroom, they pay for my travel to get there, they pay for the food at the event, but I come and teach. So we've done some things in that way where I could still be a collaborator on it. I list myself, I list it in the CV, it doesn't go through Aura, but I am a collaborator, and I've written a letter of support. You may get other requests outside from departments, institutions, those groups. Just make sure that you're getting the right amount of credit. And, Shauna mentioned that it's okay to ask for money. It's okay to be asked to be listed on that grant. That's fair. You have in your county offices access to volunteers. You have the access and the contacts with farmers. There's a value in that. And so it's okay to be asked for that. And if you're not listed on the grant, you can't put it in your CV as an Aura grant. You're not on that grant listed. And so just make sure that you're choosing those appropriately. And like I said, it's okay to ask for money. So I'm talking a little bit more about process. You've heard AgPass mentioned. So kind of, I'm putting it in like the pre-award and post-award piece. So you identify funding like, hey, I like that SARE grant. That's what I want to apply for. You can participate in webinars. A lot of the USDA has webinars that you can participate in. You can ask questions. You can get a pulse on who else might be applying and your competition is and what their projects are. You can read past funding, like they really like something along these lines. Example is our beginning farmer grant. They really like nonprofit. They love to fund nonprofits in that. So maybe I need to partner with a nonprofit. Read and reread the RFP. There's very important language in there. There's priorities. You need to address those pieces of the RFP. That is what you really need to focus on. The next thing would be to kind of develop a team and a timeline. So when is the grant due? Who are the players in this? Is there sub-awards? Is there partners? Is there other departments? There's experts, as Shauna mentioned? And then we go through AgPass. I don't have signing authority for the University of Maryland to say, Shannon Dill will do this. You do not have the signing authority to enter into contractual relationships. So that's why we have AgPass. That's why we have Aura, is you can't just write a grant and submit it as Shannon Dill, University of Maryland. You don't have signing authority. So we have a process in place to ensure all of the contracts are signed appropriately and the money funnels properly. So the first thing you'll do is fill out a notice of intent that's on the AgPass website. After you do that, it'll be a funded questionnaire. There's going to be a lot of questions on there you don't know how to answer fully. You can leave them blank, most of them, some of them. There'll be stars on the ones you have to complete. And so things like credit split might be something you're not sure of, or you're not sure of the full budget yet, right? Like I haven't gone down to the penny, and because of indirect, you have to go to pennies because you're doing like 29.3% indirect, or mileage is always like half a penny, right? So it's never these pretty round numbers like we would like. So put in the best information you have, then begin working on that budget template. AgPass has one, the sponsor might have one. So you really need to work on that budget. That's probably the biggest time sink. That's what they're going to really focus on, is those numbers. I'm not sure in the RFP if you said like, we're going to take everyone to the casino. Maybe if it's in the IRB, I know that's not it, but the budget has got to be specific and it has to be correct. So take your time on that. There's people to help work with you. Your business managers help with the salary side of it. So beginning work on that, developing the teams and the sub-awards. One successful thing we've done is, AgPass will reach out to you. Google Drive's made it really great. That's sort of a place to do working documents, and then we'll create a final docs folder. So as we have like letters of support, we can pop those in to a final docs folder, and has worked quite well. So I mentioned indirect. For us, we actually have, for our extension, we are waived at $10,000. So even if the sponsor says you need to have indirect, if it's under $10,000, you can use this waiver and not have to do that, because when you start chopping 27.5% or 26% off of your grant, all of a sudden you don't have as much funding. So these are some of the indirect rates. They do change, so you just have to be sure of it, and it has to be built into the grant. So if the max is 10,000, that 26% of indirect is part of that 10,000. It can't be 10,000 plus 26%. So you need to abide by what our indirect rates are. Some grants have a negotiated rate, or say no indirect can be charged. So an example is Maryland Grain Producers, I do not think allows indirect charges. And so the university has to abide by that RFP. So I will say, some people, it's a little eye-opening. An example is if I want to partner with, say, Deb, and she's located at the university, she's the 55% because she's on campus. There is some instructional rate or extension rate that can be done. And again, AgPass can help you work through it. So realistically, you could have multiple indirect rates if you have other sub-awards, or possibly who you're partnering with on campus. And again, a business manager and the AgPass, actually the worksheet helps you figure that out. And that calculation is built right into the worksheets. There also might be a cost share or match requirement in the grant. It's stated in the RFP. Most often, if we have a match, we use like salary time, maybe program funds, we have a couple grants that are 1-to-1. So for every dollar we get, we have to match that expense with something else that we're doing. Most often you'll see it 25 or 50%. So that's sort of the cost share. So indirect comes off the top. That's overhead expenses. Cost share or match is where they're saying, we want to see you have a little bit of buy-in to this project. This is kind of what the budget looks like. Again, start early. I would say probably do this first, start tweaking it. You have to get salaries. You need to make sure you're meeting the indirect rate, the match rates. Use the templates available to you. They make it very much easier. And Google Drive, again, works really well, sharing it with AgPass, and they will help you make those corrections on it. So we are expected, anyone from University of Maryland should be listed. If you're listed on the grant that you're doing, you're putting in for salary. So if you've got 5 co-PIs or you're the principal and you have 4 co-PIs, each one of you should be listed on that grant and have a small portion. It might be like, I've even seen like 0.25%, 0.05%, but there is that expectation from campus that every UMD person is listed on the grant has some kind of salary built into it. PI usually would make a higher percentage or, by workload. And then hiring workers, remember it's salary and fringe that goes on there. And I do have some slides on hiring that you can look at a later date. So you've done your work, you have an amazing team in place, you've written a stellar grant application, everything gets to AgPass. It feels really good when you get some of that final submittal docs. One of them is this certification, and it kind of is auto-generated. A lot of times our AgPass is great. They'll follow up with you and be like, hey, you and your other co-PIs need to complete this. So, work with them to finalize documents. It's not unusual to have to go back and forth a couple times. Sometimes you will need commitment letters with everyone listed. Sometimes you don't. I've had it happen different ways depending on the sponsor. And everyone in UMD that's listed on the grant would receive this KR certification. So that's pre-award. I'll hop quickly into post-award because I do want to have time for questions. So you're really excited about getting the grant. Usually the sponsor will send an email and say, you've been awarded the grant. So money's not there yet. There's still a number of forms and contracts that need to be signed. So at that point, you don't really want to publicly announce it. You'll work with AgPass and your sub-awardees to make sure everything's in place before you kind of blast it out there. You'll want to be talking with your team and setting things up, but you don't want to put it too far out there yet. Once agreements are complete, you'll be issued that KFS number. That's when you know you're ready to go. You're ready to start spending. It's happening. So that's when you can do kind of the agreements, public announcements, finishing up any sub awards. And that's when kind of that grant management time comes in. Having a good business manager that has access, you need to give them that KFS number so they can help you track the grant. Someone else will also be tracking your salary savings. So you would be able to use those funds, and they come in really helpful if you're traveling or need equipment purchases or anything else for your program. And this is kind of what official notice might look like. And this is the Quali dashboard where you can go and see awards. So this is the award that comes through, and you can see it now. I've got an award number and an account number, and I've got my dates, and we're ready to proceed. It's something that you'll want to work out with your team members, your CV entry and credit. Aura is going to require kind of what that percent split is. And so share CV entries between team members, list your roles, sometimes include the amount managed. You don't want to have like a full blown abstract there, but just some further details about your award. As mentioned, IRB evaluation reporting, you need to have that plan in place. Every grant's going to have some kind of report, some kind of deliverable that you've got to put in. You need to take time to develop those reporting early on. Last thing you want to do is do a whole bunch of stuff all year and get to the grant report and be like, I can't fill these spaces. Like, I don't have the data I need. So having a logic model in place, having reporting forms in place, communicating what you need to the sub-awardees is really important. Like, you need to be tracking, examples, beginning farmer. We need to know how many total people, but then how many people were 10 years or less beginning farmers and what were their demographics. And so that was a reporting form that we created. So everyone filled it out. So we had it to report. If you haven't done so, get your city training, do this now. It's important with IRB. I know this is being recorded, but be careful saying human subjects. If you don't have an IRB in place, that is something that will definitely hold up funding. If you will need to get an IRB when you start doing evaluation. So you're not exempt from IRB, but there are some things with hiring and others that can cause some holdups with IRB. So that's something I can totally help walk people through after this. But I have had a couple instances where we did not have full IRB done and it delayed the project a while. So if you do have something ahead of time, that's perfect. That's what the plan should be. And then if you're going to offer incentives or anything, that definitely needs to be in your IRB. Get your measurements in place and your reporting templates. Just the little things on grant.
We'll have some little time for the question, but yeah.
Okay. Yep. I think that's it. Because then I won't share the hiring slides. But for the grant closeout, just like you can't apply for a grant the day of, you can't close a grant out the day of. So plan ahead of time on that last phase of the grant. You can get no cost extensions. You are expected to spend it down to zero, and with indirect and those pennies, it is hard. So, try to figure those grant closeout times.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. It was so beautifully done and very thorough to let people know what exactly they need to be doing when they're applying for a grant. There's so many volume of pre-work that is needed even before you go there or look for the RFAs and try to respond to all of that. So thank you very much. Again, my virtual little bit song and dance thing. Thank you. So, well, that was a wonderful panel. I really liked the kind of information that we received, and we had a good representation of all the program areas, big program areas that our extension does. So now it's time for Q&A. I do have several questions, really hard ones for them, but if anybody would like to open their mic and go ahead and ask our panelists any questions that you have, please feel free to do so first. Thanks, Amy. Okay, any questions, or should I start asking those? Okay, I just took a picture. Okay, so maybe I can start and people can chime in. So first thing is, we spoke about different program areas. Now we are coming to one platform as this extension. So what do you think are the challenges for writing a grant? What you would think like people are not willing to go for writing a grant? What is forbidding them doing so? And anybody can start.
But I think, a lot of what was just talked about was, understanding the process. And I think, I know for myself, IRB can be really challenging, actually sometimes more challenging than than the actual process itself. But it depends who you're partnering. I think it depends who the grant is with. If somebody you feel more comfortable with, a group, it might be easier. I do know, I've had some grants with campus faculty and sometimes with field faculty. That can be a little challenging because field campus faculty, you work with research and grad students and other things. And many of the grants they have may require, in some cases, an extension component. And I know I've been asked before about that, but it's important to make sure that that you like, I think it was mentioned by a couple of them that you receive some funding for that, for the work you're going to do. Because you're providing outreach and education, and many campus faculty, that's just very difficult to do in the environment that they work in. So I guess this depends who you're working with.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? No?
Well, I guess I'm thinking of, I have gotten 4-H grants before where the amount of funding was small, but the management and the reporting and all of the things that come along with it, the strings that are attached, were very, very cumbersome. I remember getting a grant, I think it was less than $1,000, and they required that you attend an all-day event, and then you get, you were recognized. And then also, I think the reporting was every quarter for 3 years or something like that. And I can't even remember, I think I blocked it out of my memory. It was kind of traumatic. That's one that I don't think I would ever go for that funding again, because for the amount of money to bring in, it was a tremendous amount of reporting for many years afterward. So just consider how much time you're going to invest into managing the grant and see, is it really worth it? Is the amount of funding you're bringing in going to help you accomplish Extension's mission? Is that enough to be worth the effort that goes into the grant?
Right, right. So you would suggest to go for some big grants and more streamlined. And as Shauna and Shannon were saying, never means, be scared to fail, because if you have all your paperwork ready, you're going for one USD and NIFA grant. And that happened to me. I was a faculty in an academic department before I came into this position. That was my life. So we would have all these paperwork ready and everything, the support letters, every single document, and then it fails. And then, but it makes you easier because you already are experienced. You know how to do the paperwork, you know the process. So next time you are already knowledgeable, we are not starting from scratch, and then go for it. So, and those are much more institutionalized, streamlined, and paperwork is also, you have quite a bit of pre-knowledge about what work is going to come, or how to write a report, what do they want in a report. These are all very streamlined. So that would be probably helpful for a lot of people as well to get started with big grants.
I would say too, the reality is that as an extension faculty, if you want to get tenure, if you want to get promoted, I mean, honestly, you're going to have to get some grant money, because where are you going to be able to get the scholarship and accomplishments without outside money? And I would argue that that's probably not possible. So in some cases, it's something that may be a little bit scary and things like that, but it's something that's almost essential to be successful.
Okay, cool. Well, okay. And let's go to another question. How do we form an interdisciplinary team in University of Maryland Extension? I personally know, and I'm going through all the impact statements and other data sets to see what kind of work is going on, which is thriving, which is getting started and all that. But when we institutionally try to form an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary team, how do we go about doing it? And especially for the newer faculty members, those who are coming in, haven't already set their shops yet as we speak, they would also, if they're interested to do any interdisciplinary work, what would you say?
It probably depends on which direction you're going for interdisciplinary, right? Is it something that's lab-based, but you also have a sociology concept or another piece? So it could be just going to some of the department faculty and staff directories and seeing who might you start a conversation with for one point, or if you do know someone on campus or other folks in extension that might have an idea of who, because they've done similar work, that might be another way. But interdisciplinary, many different routes to go.
Okay, cool.
And I
Anybody?
think-
I would ask the question, this maybe Shannon, that, I mean, when you develop a grants, when you're developing grants with people, have you really developed grants with people that you haven't had some type of relationship or work with? Are these other brand new people, and all of a sudden you call them cold turkey and you're gonna do this grant?
Very rarely, very rarely. I think generally have selected partners that I know have great programs that are impactful, that are as driven or passionate about the grant that you're writing, because you need everyone on the team to be lifting to make the project work. So yeah, it's usually people that you're already sort of partnering with, and then you kind of either seek out funding or you see an announcement and you're like, that would work for us perfect.
So would you advise that we keep a team ready? And then when an opportunity comes in, we go for that? Means I did see Tom mentioning about how they collaborate in 4-H, or how they have priority areas, which is aligned with what we do at UME. Even if we have 10,000 different research topics, we probably cannot take that up, since it's not in our institutional or any other places. So that is, of course, very 4-H specific. Like, we have these models and these folks, and we are collaborating, we are in a team already. That is one way interdisciplinary, I would say, because there are different pockets. Not everybody is doing STEM or robotics or anything like that. But when we are talking about going from, let's say, 4 different faculty members from 4 big P programs, Egg Food System, 4-H, and ENR and FCS coming together, that would be really interesting to see. That would bring out all the expertise to the table to do something. So, okay. And so let's say if I take you guys to a retrospective survey mode and ask you what UME would have done to make your lives better, in terms of resources or anything, expertise or anything that would have been provided to you to make it a little better, the workplace, your job, your life, and work-life balance would have been a little better, would you say anything would have helped? And this question is more like, what can we do in the future to make it better? We know we have experienced people, but we also know that we have new people coming into the workforce, and we are in the business of the workforce training. Our POD is probably working with all the programs across the board. So we definitely would like to know that, so that we can implement going ahead for the newer ones.
So I will say that post-award management has been something, and I think when you develop your teams, we've talked very much about sort of the PIs and co-PIs, but there's other team that you build to make this grant happen, whether it's in your office, in your regional centers, working with people to help you track a budget. As the PI, generally, you're not just managing the grant, you're also doing the an educational component, a marketing component, perhaps you're hiring. So there really needs to be engagement there of our hiring and administrative systems to make it successful. There's no way just the people listed on that grant can pull it off. So our evaluation department, having reviewers, having administrative help, having people help with hiring and training and onboarding is extremely helpful.
Mhm.
And I think we have some gaps in these places, or maybe it isn't as streamlined. In my perfect world, when I get the KFS number, I would love to see that be the trigger that starts everything. You
Mhm.
know, when I see that number happen, I'm like, okay, like, let's go to work. And I would love to see, you know, whether it's job announcements happen, you know, I would just love to see all of a sudden everything starts. And it feels like it's such a heavy lift from, you know, those first couple months.
Mhm. Mhm. Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing that.
The one
yeah.
thing I can think of just from in 4-H world, the only grant that was ever really a challenge to manage for me was one that we had the governor's office money through the local management board, where we had funding for a salary for a part-time person. And the difficult thing, and Shannon's in my office, and times I probably should have just gone down and asked her to show me how to do it. But trying to figure out when it comes close to end of year or reporting time, how much money, like which pay periods have already come out of the grant, been deducted, because there's a lag between timesheets and pay being processed and things like that. That's the part where and I would contact our business manager and say, this makes no sense. And she would try to help me. And sometimes we could figure it out. And sometimes I just had to be conservative and say, we're going to leave one pay period where the person stops working, even though we theoretically could have money in there on that last pay period, because I don't know if that money is actually there. So that whole salary management is the thing that made my head spin.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we probably do not have any dedicated person who is taking care of the post-award administration, right? So it's all done by the faculty members or locally in your offices. That's how it has been the case.
Place.
Yeah.
There definitely needs to be the engagement. You know, I've engaged with Rhonda generally, with Rhonda and Stephanie, whether it's hiring or they don't track the grant as much, but it does depend on whether you're in an office, if you have someone that's trained or comfortable with that, someone that you trust
Mhm.
that, you know, is tracking that, because it's, again, it's not something we can, you know, not look at for a couple months, especially if you've got salary coming out. So I would say there's a lot of variability across the state and probably inequity of grant support throughout the state.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, so that is noted. Now we'll see, we'll bring that to everybody. Means what I have been doing, or POD has been doing, is to do this onboarding and all. So it has been a little better, more streamlined, but we do have a lot of work to do. Last year, we had 2 different series that we gave people. One was the onboarding series, where we were trying to bring them in, knowing what competency skill level they have and what they need from us. And then I have been doing 101 support with everybody, sitting down and taking them through the logic model, or somebody wants to have. So it has gone, means I have seen growth in individual faculty members, those who just came last year, asking me to come on a multi-state project proposal when they're brainstorming. They want me to be in that room to know what's going on, if I can support them in any way, or write some pieces for them to, you know, the documents and all that. So that is one way, but then we still have a lot of other issues that's outstanding. Means it's overwhelming sometimes to think about juggling so many things and not having a dedicated post-award person to administer all of that work or take care of it. So that is, sorry, Jonathan, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just make one comment, and this has to just do with IRB. I mean, I've just found that over the years, it's just become, you know, very, very complicated. Not only dealing with the grant, and, you know, it's just become just so overpowering in terms of the types of things, and you send back surveys and stuff, and they're like, depending on the person you get, to be like nuancing with words, or, you know, some person mentioned about chemicals. Well, I mean, to what level do we have to make ourselves credible to folks that are reading these and, you know, asking questions about surveys? And I don't know, some people, I guess, don't have any problem with it. I just think it's much too an invasive process at this point. And when I've had to do it, I just found that's, I'm just a little overly critical of the process.
I know, I understand. So IRB, yeah, IRB could be quite overwhelming. But again, we are trying to, when the new folks are coming these days, we are trying to support them to get their city training as quickly as possible, and then make them IRB ready should they have any proposal going or any research project or anything like that. So that has been going on very successfully. I see when I came in, I didn't have any record. So I reached out to the IRB office in UMD to get a record of how many projects currently are, or how many were filed in the last year. And they told me there are 12. And I was like, oh, okay. And now in my account, it's 41. So we are definitely doing really good in terms of IRB, but it is not enough. That also I know. We need to reach out to everybody and have that, you know, kind of support that we can provide. But that definitely is doable, and we will do that. But about the post award, I clearly see that's a big issue, and that is for the higher administration to decide on. But I will definitely bring that to everyone's attention. Just a little hint, we have somebody here, so Jeff's work starts now. Okay, so yeah, any other questions from our participant, or any last thought any panel member would like to share with our new folks?
Well, I was just going to say, I apologize. Zoom was fighting me in the beginning. I was thinking my display settings were changed and they weren't. So some of those first slides may have been a little difficult to see, but I can email my slide set. If anybody wants it, just let me know, mainly the 4-H people, I guess, and I can email it to you if you want to look at the slides on your own time.
Awesome, thank you. We do have the recordings. Those came out really great. And okay. And that I'm going to share. I mean, the recording is going to the whole extension again, because that we have been practicing ever since I came in. There are a lot of people, those who are not technically in the faculty position, but they're called staff, but they do quite a bit of work as well. And they are struggling as well how to support the faculty members. So these resources, we are making everybody available. They can have access. We have a website now, which is still under construction, but eventually all of these resources are going there. And in the future, if you would like to share your slides, we can come up with the PDF and other copies that cannot be duplicated, but can be viewed. And we will keep that on there for everybody to access in a later date. Okay, so thank you, everybody. That was a brilliant session, and we are just getting started. So the first one, I also didn't know all across what's happening and what is going on, what are the challenges, and how we can help as a central unit to the whole extension. So we have a lot of work to do. And the research wing of our AGNR has also offered their help. So I would also see how much we can bring from them and what work we should be doing to increase the capacity of people to get grants and make their life much easier. So thank you, everybody, for sharing all your perspectives. And I'm going to share this recording with everybody. And if you have any questions and concerns, please reach out to us. We have all these well-known panel members, so they know how to reach you, but I can also share your email addresses in the email. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.